He handed me the envelope at the reception, not before, not after, during. While people were still holding plates of food they hadn't touched, while my aunt was still crying into a napkin in the corner, while the smell of white lilies was so thick I could barely breathe, that was the moment my husband chose. "We need to talk," he said. He said it quietly, like he was asking me to pass the salt. I looked at him. He was wearing a dark suit. He looked fine. He looked like a man who had somewhere to be afterward. I followed him into the hallway outside the banquet room. The door swung shut behind us, and suddenly the muffled sound of grief was on one side, and it was just the two of us, standing under fluorescent lights, and he held out a manila envelope. "I filed last week," he said. "I just need your signature." I didn't open it. I already knew what it was. You know, the way you sometimes know things before you know them. Like the second before a glass hits the floor. You see it falling and your brain hasn't caught up yet, but your stomach already has. "My brother just died," I said. "I know," he said. "I'm sorry about that." He meant it the way people mean it when they say it to a stranger. Appropriate words in an appropriate sequence. Nothing behind them. I took the envelope, I don't know why. Maybe because my hands needed something to hold. I walked back into the reception, sat down in a chair near the window, and I looked at the papers inside without really reading them. My name. His name. Date of marriage. Date of filing. My best friend since childhood. Petra. She came and sat beside me without asking. She didn't say anything. She just put her hand over mine and sat there while the room moved around us. I signed them that evening. I signed them because I was too tired to be angry yet, and because somewhere in the back of my mind I understood that what he was handing me was not a catastrophe. It was a confirmation. Something I had been sensing for almost a year but have refused to look at directly. I signed them and I handed them back, and I went upstairs to my childhood bedroom in my mother's house, and I lay down on top of the covers in my dress and I stared at the ceiling. My brother's name was Elliot. He was 39. He coached Little League on Saturday mornings, even though he didn't have kids of his own yet. He made the best smoked brisket of anyone I've ever known. He called me every Sunday without fail, sometimes just to say nothing in particular. He died on the Tuesday morning when a driver ran a red light on Route 9, and he was gone before the paramedics arrived. I am 31 years old, and my brother was the steadiest thing in my life. And now, I have to tell you about the man who married his wife while he was still warm in the ground. His name is Warren. Warren came into my life 6 years ago, through my brother actually. They played on the same recreational basketball team. Elliot brought him to a cookout at my mother's house one summer, and Warren was charming and easy and he laughed at everything, and I was 25 and I thought that was enough. We got married 2 years later in a small ceremony in the Catskills. I thought we were happy. I think I genuinely thought that. His wife, Elliot's wife, her name is Nina. Nina and Elliot had been married for 4 years. She was the kind of woman who took up a lot of space without being loud about it. She had opinions about everything, and she stated them like they were just facts. And most of the time people went along with it because she said things with such absolute certainty. I always found her a little exhausting, but she was my brother's wife, and he loved her, and that was enough for me. She and Warren had apparently been exhausting each other in a different way for a while. I didn't know that then. I'm getting there. After Elliot's funeral, I went back to the apartment Warren and I shared in Hoboken. It was the apartment I had put the down payment on, my savings, the money I'd been setting aside since I was 22. Warren had contributed later once we were married, but the bones of that place were mine. I had chosen the building, negotiated the lease, picked the paint colors. I had a spider plant on the kitchen windowsill I'd been keeping alive for 3 years. Warren wasn't there when I got back. He said he had work things. I didn't ask. I was exhausted in a way that went past my body. I sat in our apartment alone and I realized I didn't know what I was supposed to do next. He came home late that night and I was already in bed. He slept on his side. He didn't reach for me. In the weeks after my brother's death, I kept discovering things. It started small. A receipt in Warren's jacket pocket for a restaurant I'd never heard of. On a Wednesday, when he'd told me he was at a work dinner at a completely different place, I might have let that go. I almost did. I told myself there were explanations. I was grieving and my brain was looking for problems to solve because it couldn't solve the real one. But then Petra called me. Petra had seen them. She'd been visiting her cousin in Summit, Warren and Nina, at a wine bar close together. Not the way brother-in-law and sister-in-law sit, the way people sit when they think they're far enough from home. "How long do you think?" I asked her. "Longer than you want to know," she said, and her voice was so careful that I understood she was choosing those words specifically to keep from saying something worse. I went through Warren's phone that night while he slept. I know that's not something people admit easily, but I am not going to perform dignity that I did not have in that moment. I was a woman who had just buried her brother and was about to lose her marriage, and I needed to know what I was dealing with. What I found was worse than I expected and exactly what I deserved for looking. The messages went back 14 months. 14. My brother had been alive for 10 of those months. They had been standing at his barbecue and sitting at his Thanksgiving table and laughing at his jokes while they were doing this. Nina had sent Warren a voice message once. I didn't play it, I couldn't. And the timestamp was 11 days after Elliot's diagnosis. While my brother was sitting in an oncologist's office learning that the shadows on his scan were something serious, his wife was sending voice messages to my husband. I put the phone back. I lay down next to Warren. I watched the ceiling for a long time. In the morning, he left for work, and I called Petra, and I told her everything, and I cried for approximately 45 minutes. Then I stopped. I felt something shift. I don't know how to describe it except to say it was like when you've been holding something very heavy for so long that you forget you're holding it, and then you set it down, and the relief is enormous, but also strange, because now you have to figure out what to do with your hands. I called a lawyer. Her name was Andrea Chen, and she had a small office in Jersey City, and she was the sharpest person I've met before or since. I told her everything in about 20 minutes, and she took notes, and when I was done, she looked at me and said, "The apartment is your primary concern. Tell me about the down payment." I told her. She wrote things down. "And your brother's estate?" she asked. That was when I told her about the business. Elliot had built something real. He started a home renovation company straight out of trade school, just him in a truck and a good reputation. By the time he died, it had 12 employees, a solid client list in northern Jersey, and a name people trusted. He had brought Warren in as an operations manager 2 years earlier, which in retrospect I understand was about Nina advocating for it constantly until Elliot agreed. Elliot's will left the business to me. I did not know this until 3 weeks after the funeral, when his attorney called and asked me to come in. Apparently, Elliot had updated his will 8 months before he died, after his diagnosis. He hadn't told me. He was the kind of person who didn't make a big production of things. He just quietly made decisions and trusted that they would matter when they needed to. He left the business to me, and he left a letter with the attorney, a sealed letter with my name on it, to be opened when I came in. I'm Robert Sinclair, 67 years old, but first I need to tell you what Warren did when he found out. He found out through Nina. She had been expecting to inherit the business, or at least have significant control of it. She and Warren had apparently been planning around that assumption for months. When the will was read and it was my name on the documents, something shifted very fast. Warren called me on a Thursday afternoon. He was using his calm voice, the one he used when he was negotiating something. "We should talk about Elliot's company," he said. "Okay," I said. "Nina is going to need to be involved in the transition. She was his wife." She has context. "She was his wife," I said. "I'm his sister, and the company is mine." "That seems like a really short-sighted way to handle this," he said. "Legally, she might have a—" "She doesn't," I said. "I've already spoken to Andrea." Silence. "You have a lawyer?" "I do," I said. "Do you have something else you'd like to say?" He hung up. 3 days later, Nina showed up at the business office. I know because the office manager, a woman named Greta, who had worked for Elliot for 6 years and was deeply loyal to his memory, called me immediately. Nina told Elliot's employees that she would be stepping into a management role during the transition. She walked around the office. She looked at files. She made comments about restructuring. Greta asked her politely to leave and called me. I drove there. 22 minutes on Route 3, the longest 22 minutes of my life. I walked in wearing the most composed expression I have ever manufactured, and I looked at Nina across my brother's office. His coffee mug was still on the desk, his handwriting still on the whiteboard in the corner. And I said, "This is private property and you don't work here. You have 10 minutes to leave before I call the police." She looked at me like I was being unreasonable. "Your brother would have wanted—" "Don't," I said. "Do not." She left. I sat in Elliot's chair after she walked out and I put my hands flat on his desk and I breathed. Warren moved out of the apartment the following week. He did it while I was at the office, which I was grateful for. I came home and his side of the closet was empty and the apartment felt simultaneously smaller and bigger, which I know doesn't make sense. He took the television, which we had bought together. He left the spider plant. I almost smiled at that. I'm not sure why. What came next was 6 weeks of paperwork and phone calls and meetings with Andrea and meetings with Elliot's business attorney and long evenings alone in the apartment where I learned the difference between grief and logistics, which is that logistics keeps moving whether you're ready or not. Warren and Nina were not quiet about their relationship. That part surprised me. I had expected them to be discreet, at least initially, the way people usually are when they're aware they've done something indefensible. Instead, they were photographed at a rooftop bar in Midtown within 3 weeks of Warren moving out. Petra sent me the Instagram story without comment. I looked at it for a long time. Warren was wearing Elliot's jacket. I recognized it immediately. Dark green, worn leather collar, a small tear near the left pocket that Elliot had been meaning to get repaired. I had seen that jacket 100 times. I had no idea Warren had taken it, or when, or how. But there it was on him in a photo where he was laughing at something Nina had said. I didn't say anything to anyone about it, but I did not forget it. The business took my full attention for the next 2 months, and I am grateful for that, actually. I had to learn things fast. Greta walked me through the operations. I started coming in every day. I sat in Elliot's chair and I learned his filing system, and I met with his contractors and I understood slowly what he had built and why people trusted it. There was one situation that needed immediate attention. Warren, in his time as operations manager, had been running some of the company's vendor payments through an account that wasn't properly documented in the main books. I found this because Greta flagged it. She'd noticed it for months but hadn't known what to do about it. I brought it to Andrea. Andrea referred me to a forensic accountant named Patrick, who took 3 weeks and produced a report that I will not describe in full detail except to say that the number was not small. Warren had been running personal expenses, hotel stays, restaurant bills, 2 flights I can only assume were to somewhere he wasn't supposed to be, through vendor accounts that were supposed to be for legitimate business purposes. I sat with that report for a long time before I decided what to do with it. He called me in late October. He used the same calm, negotiating voice. "I want to talk about the divorce settlement," he said. "Okay," I said. "I think we should discuss the apartment," he said. "I contributed significantly to Warren," I said. "I need you to stop talking for a second." He stopped. "Before we discuss anything about the settlement," I said, "I need you to know that I have a forensic accounting report in front of me, and I have an appointment with the county prosecutor's office next Wednesday." The silence was different this time. "I haven't decided yet whether to file a formal complaint," I said. "That's still up to me, but I think before you make any claims about what you're entitled to, you should probably talk to a lawyer." He did not use the calm voice when he spoke again. "You wouldn't do that," he said. "I buried my brother 6 months ago," I said. "And then I found out you'd been taking from his company while you were sleeping with his wife. So, I let that sit there. The apartment stays with me," I said. "And I think we both know that's the right outcome." He hired an attorney. The attorney looked at the forensic report. The settlement was finalized in 11 weeks, which is fast, and the apartment stayed with me, which was always the only outcome I was going to accept. Nina's situation resolved itself somewhat differently. Without the business, which she had been counting on as a financial foundation, and without the inheritance she had apparently expected, she found herself significantly less stable than she had planned. I found out through my mother, who still lived in the same town and therefore knew things, that Nina had listed the house she and Elliot had shared for sale within 2 months of the estate being settled. The house had equity, but not enough for the plans she'd apparently made. I know exactly what she had been expecting. I think she had been expecting a version of events where Elliot's death made her wealthy and Warren's departure from my life made her free, and those 2 things together were supposed to add up to something. Instead, they added up to a rental in a town she'd never talked about wanting to live in, and a business that belonged to someone else, and a man who, as far as I could tell, was still wearing a dead man's jacket. I opened my brother's letter the day the settlement was finalized. I had been keeping it in the inside pocket of my work bag, which sounds strange but felt right. I wanted it near me. I didn't open it until I was ready, and I didn't know when that would be. And then one afternoon in November, I was sitting at his desk and the office was quiet, and I just knew. His handwriting. Elliot always wrote in this slightly cramped block print, like he was conserving paper. He didn't explain in the letter why he'd made the decisions he made. He wasn't that kind of person. He just said that he trusted me. He said the company had been the best thing he'd built and he knew I would take care of the people in it. He said he was sorry for not telling me sooner about the will, but he hadn't wanted to make it real before he had to. At the end, he wrote, "Don't be too hard on yourself for anything. You were always the one who saw things clearly. You just needed time to look." I read that sentence 4 times. I sat in his chair in the November afternoon light and I let myself cry properly for the first time in months. Not the crying that happens at funerals, which is public and has a shape to it, but the other kind, the kind that doesn't have a reason beyond the simple, unbearable fact of missing someone. I cried for a long time. Then I stopped. Then I went back to work. The company has 14 employees now. We just landed a contract for a renovation project that will keep us busy through next spring. Greta got a raise. I planted a second spider plant on the windowsill at the office because it felt like the right thing to do. I don't know what Warren and Nina are doing. I genuinely don't think about it very often. I heard from Petra that they had a rough winter, which I received as information and filed away and did nothing with. There is one thing I still think about sometimes, though. The letter. Elliot wrote that letter 8 months before he died. He had already revised his will. He had already quietly set things in motion. My brother was 39 years old and he had a terminal diagnosis, and he sat down and thought about what mattered and what would last, and he chose me. I think about whether he knew. Not about the accident. That was random. That was just a driver and a red light and terrible timing. But about the rest of it. About Warren. About Nina. I think about those 14 months of messages, and I think about my brother at his own Thanksgiving table, and I wonder what he saw, what he suspected, what he chose not to say, because he was the kind of person who didn't make a production of things. I will never know. That is the part I have made peace with, and also the part that stays with me. What I know is what he left. Not just the business, not just the letter. The fact of it, the quiet, deliberate, absolute fact that when my brother sat down to decide who he trusted with everything he built, he thought of me. That has to be enough. Most days it is. There's something nobody tells you about the aftermath of a betrayal. Not the big dramatic part, not the moment you find the messages, not the moment you sign the papers. Those moments are terrible, but they're also weirdly clear. You know exactly what is happening and you know exactly what you have to do next. The part nobody tells you about is the quiet that comes after. The November afternoons. The spider plant on the windowsill. Sitting in my brother's chair and learning his filing system and realizing slowly that the life I thought I was losing had already been replaced by something steadier, something that was actually mine. I think about Warren sometimes. Not with anger. That passed faster than I expected. I think about the version of him that showed up at a cookout in my mother's backyard and laughed easily and seemed like a person worth building something with. I don't think that person was entirely fake. I think he was real, and then he made a series of choices that real people make when they want something badly enough to stop caring about who they hurt getting it. That's the thing about choices. They accumulate. Every small decision to take something that isn't yours, every hotel receipt run through a vendor account, every message sent while sitting at a table with the person you're betraying, they don't disappear. They sit in the record. And eventually someone like Andrea or Patrick with his forensic spreadsheets, or just plain time, something finds them. Nina thought she was building a future. She had a plan that depended on my brother's death, making her wealthy, and my marriage ending, making her free. She was organized about it, methodical, and none of it worked, not because the universe intervened in some mystical way, but because plans built on other people's suffering have structural problems. They require too many things to go right that you can't actually control. What I learned. What I had to learn the hard way, sitting alone in that apartment after Warren's side of the closet went empty, is that integrity is not a feeling. It's not something you have when things are easy. It's a series of decisions you make when nobody is watching and nothing is forcing you, and those decisions are what determine what you're left with when everything else falls away. Elliot knew that. He built a company on it. 12 employees who trusted him, a reputation that outlasted him. A letter he wrote to his sister when he was 38 years old and scared and still thinking about other people. I keep that letter in the inside pocket of my bag. I don't read it often, but I know it's there. What I want to say to anyone watching this, anyone who is sitting somewhere right now feeling like the ground has gone out from under them, like everything they built is being taken by people who don't deserve it, is this: what belongs to you cannot actually be stolen. The things Warren took were always things. The jacket, the television, the money he skimmed from Bender accounts. Things. What Elliot gave me was not a thing. It was trust and clarity and the quiet knowledge that someone had looked at me clearly and decided I was enough. That cannot be taken. It can only be earned, and it turns out you earn it the same way every time. By showing up, by being honest, by doing the work even when nobody is watching. That's all I've got. That and a spider plant that's doing just fine.